Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It's been a week now, or maybe 8 days, because India made this announcement a day earlier of a settlement, an agreement, or an arrangement, if you want to be overly cautious or very diplomatic, on the line of actual control in Ladakh, in areas where the two sides had fraught relationships or clashes or a contestation, state of contestation since the early spring of 2020, generally say March, April 2020. Now we know that in some of those areas, some kind of an arrangement was arrived at earlier in different stages. We talked about that in our earlier episode of Cut the Clutter. That is Kailash Range, Pangong Lake area, Gogra, Hot Springs, Changchenmo, and also the Galwan area. But some regions were left. One was up north, that is what we call as subsector north, DBO or Depsang area, Depsang Plains facing it, and also deep south, say about 560 kilometers south from there, the Demchok area. Now, these two have seen the new arrangements now, whereby the patrols from two sides have been separated. Those two sides have been checking out each other's promises in terms of removing the structures that they had built. Indian forces that you might have seen from Snehesh Alex Phillips' story, and you will see a screenshot on your screens. I will share a link also with you, saying that the Indian troops have gone across the bottleneck area now, what is called as bottleneck area, to check out, to confirm that the Chinese have removed the structures, temporary structures that they had built there. So this arrangement is going on. However, if you watch your TV channels and if you read your commentariat, also on social media from people who are well informed, you will find a lot of confusion still reigning there. That is, have new buffer zones been created? Have old buffer zones now been removed so we or the Chinese can patrol across the buffer zones into each other's, up to each other's perceived patrolling points or where they used to go in the past? More importantly, however, there is also some discussion on whether there have been similar arrangements on other parts of the line of actual control as well, particularly in the eastern sector. You found some in the media claiming more emphatically, Snehesh's story says it in a more qualified way, that the two sides have agreed that the area of Yangtze is beyond Tawang. That was the last area in which a Chinese patrol had come into what India sees as its own area of control, where a strong Indian unit, forewarned of the Chinese movement, had stopped it physically, and there had been some fisticuffs where the Chinese also suffered some injuries, a few on the Indian side, but mostly on the Chinese side. Now, there is also a belief that some arrangement has been arrived at in that area as well. And then this begs a larger question. Have the two countries now decided on a bigger arrangement whereby these patrol clashes can be avoided going ahead? So peace and tranquility on the border can be ensured while each side keeps its claims. Now, to talk about that, I will have Snehesh Alex Philip join in very soon, and he will answer these questions I will put to him. Meanwhile, let me just tell you a little bit. Sometimes it's important to understand where the problem is coming from. This problem right now is not coming from China wanting all of Arunachal Pradesh, which they call South Tibet, and add to their maps and also give their own names to places, landmarks in Arunachal Pradesh, nor is it connected to India wanting Aksai Chin or Chinese wanting the rest of Ladakh from India. No. This is about what is called, the key thing is the Chinese 1959 claim line. Now, from where does the claim line emerge? Because what the Chinese have been demanding and what they've been pushing at, and what they pushed at in 2020 also, was control or some kind of a sway up to what they see as their 1959 claim line. So first of all, what is the 1959 claim line and why is it so important to the Chinese, and similarly, why is it so important to us in India as well? Now, it was in the so-called Shimla Convention where the Tibetan Authority and the British Authority, they were present, that the McMahon line was drawn. Now, McMahon line was drawn on 3rd of July 1914. The fact is that for 40 years after that, India never sent out forces to establish control or presence along the McMahon line. The Aksai-Chin area was a bit more confusing because Indian maps before 1950 and after have a variance, and that is something that K.S. Bhasin's book also talks about. See the book's cover. That's a very important book because it is important to see all points of view. In 1950, when Nehru met Chou En-lai, and he mentioned that McMahon line was our border, Chou En-lai did not particularly raise any objection to it. It's only later that the Chinese began to get worried about it, because Chinese by now had militarized Tibet. They had also militarized Aksai-Chin. So they had begun to challenge what they saw as a British construct of these borderlands, and they wanted to secure these very distant parts of China, and they saw India as an inheritor of the British Empire, which India was in the subcontinent, and India rightly claimed to be so. And just as they might have seen threats from the imperial British power earlier, they were now seeing the same threats from India, because these are very distant areas of China and not that easy to defend, particularly not in the state of preparedness or resources that the Chinese were at that point. They were also recovering from their own Revolutionary War and also the Second World War, mainly against the Japanese at that point of time, and also the Korean War, etc. That had sapped, all of those had sapped the Chinese. 1954, Nehru wrote a letter to the Chinese side, basically laying out India's claims along the McMahon line. 1954 is also the time when Indian forces, mainly Assam Rifles, small units of Assam Rifles, small patrols, went up to what India saw as its border in Arunachal Pradesh, which was then named Northeastern Frontier Agency. So India established its own control on the eastern side, in particular to its claim line, even before the Chinese were able to do it. And it was in that process that a strong Assam Rifles patrol led by Major Bob Khating, a true national hero, he went to Tawang and unfurled the Indian flag and made Tawang a part of the Indian territory. Now, it was in that period the Chinese also began to look at these borderlands. So 1959 it was when Chou En-lai wrote a letter to Jawaharlal Nehru. In that letter, he suggested the concept of his 1959 claim line. Now, if you see that claim line, again, there's a bunch of books I will mention to you. So the book you should see is Neville Maxwell's India-China War, still very available in India in reprints. It's a very, very much read book. In the Indian side, our side thinks by and large that this gives the Chinese point of view. I knew Neville Maxwell when he came to India. Sometimes he called on me. I used to work in India Today then. He was a dyed-in-the-wool crimson Trotskyite, and he was also very much a storyteller for the Chinese, and he had a very pro-Chinese view on this dispute, and he thought fully that India was to blame for this war. That's why he called his book India's China War. Of course, a counter to him was written later, much later, by Bertil Lintner, who's a Swedish origin researcher / journalist / author who usually specializes in Eastern Himalayas and also in the Myanmar, Thailand, that region. His latest book has just come out, new book. Please check it out. See the jacket on your screens as well. So he wrote a counter to Neville Maxwell's India's China War called China's India War, Collision Course on the Roof of the World. So these two books are essential reading. There is also a book by our former ambassador C.V. Ranganathan and Vinod C. Khanna, that is India and China, The Way Ahead. Now, they also explain to us what was this 1959 claim line of Chou En-lai. And then I will tell you how General Panag, in an article, General H.S. Panag explained to us the significance, the strategic significance of this 1959 claim line. So in the western sector, that is in the Ladakh sector, the claim line came up to mostly the areas which were then now reduced to buffer zones, that is Kogra, Hot Springs, Pangong, in some ways Demchok as well, although Demchok has more complexities to it, and then Galwan and Depsang. These are all the areas where the Chinese think that India could have had ingress into Aksai Chin, because if India has to ever launch an aggressive move to take over Aksai Chin, then India will need to send in forces through these areas. These are the only places available through any Indian forces of any size can come in. In fact, about 2 decades back, General Panag tells us there was an exercise carried out by PLA which looked at the possibility of a division-sized Indian force sprinting down the Depsang plains into the jugular of Aksai Chin. So every army prepares for the worst. These points which the Chinese have tried to block and which the Chinese included in their 1959 claim line, they don't add up to a lot of territory. In fact, this is maybe a tiny fraction of territory compared to what the Chinese took with Aksai Chin. But these control the access points to Aksai Chin. However, if the Chinese deny India access to these, then it exposes a lot of Indian defenses, particularly in subsector north, Doral Beg Oldi, to the Chinese. See these maps. A close look at the maps will help you understand this. That is where this is coming from. Now the Chinese on the eastern side, while the Chinese claimed all of Arunachal Pradesh, in the same process, Chou En-lai also suggested that Indian and Chinese forces withdraw 20 kilometers behind their claim lines. So each side goes 20 kilometers behind their claim lines, and this 20-kilometer zone should be a kind of buffer zone, which each side, up to its own perception of ownership, can send out unarmed police or civil officials, but no armed people and no military patrols. Now, that is something that was not acceptable to India for the simple reason that if this was followed in Ladakh, then that would close off all of India's possible ingress points into Aksai Chin and at the same time expose all of India's defenses, including the subsector north underbelly, right behind which lies Sasirla, which is just the only thing standing between Doral Beg Oldi and the base of the Siachen Glacier. So this Siachen Glacier was not such a big deal in the 50s, but the fact is that Doral Beg Oldi, right at the root of Karakoram Pass, was a very sensitive area. So India did not want to expose this on the western side. On the eastern side, if each side had pulled back 20 kilometers, strategically and tactically, it would have all been to India's cost. Because on the eastern side, just as on the western side, India has the disadvantage of terrain because the Chinese are coming from a plateau and India has to defend, and India then has the mountains behind it. On the eastern side, India is on the highest ridges because the watershed is more or less the border and the Chinese are coming in from below. So therefore, India to withdraw 20 kilometers, India would have had massive logistical challenges. And that is the reason this 1959 claim line that Chou En-lai suggested was a no-go situation for India. There were talks after that. By this time, the Chinese attitudes had also hardened. Initially, early 50s, it wasn't so bad. But from 1952 onwards, the Americans, the CIA, started launching supplies and help and dropping weapons for Buddhist Khampa rebels in Tibet. Those flights were carried out not from an Indian airbase, but from Dhaka in what used to be East Pakistan. But the Chinese presumed that they were going over Indian airspace. Now, whether India was allowing these to go or India did not have the wherewithal to monitor these, those are open questions. I'm quite willing to believe that India knew that this was happening and India let it happen. So it was in this fraught situation that Chou En-lai came with this idea, which was rejected. Now, General Panag and many others think that with these moves in 2020, the Chinese were pushing India back in Ladakh to what is their 1959 claim line. That means even if I don't have it, you shall not have it. They will be buffer zones so that my rear is protected. Some of the agreements are now around these buffer zones, and these agreements are in the nature of you can patrol to where you were patrolling, I can patrol to where I was patrolling. We have to notify each other of our patrols. And in the eastern sector, as Snehesh explained in the story, Chinese bring patrols to the Yangtze area where they used to bring patrols. But once they blocked us in Ladakh, we blocked them in Arunachal, in Yangtze area as well. So if they send in patrols, again, it will be regulated, it will be notified. These will also be escorted patrols. So escorted by the Indian side. So this is this complex agreement that we need to understand. If you look at the Depsang area in particular, the Depsang area before 1962, India hardly had any troops there, but India did have some, and there was some combat in the early stages of the 1962 war in the Depsang area, because India then had some tiny posts or lookouts, say 5 to 10 kilometers east of Dolbe Goldi. Those one by one was folded over. The Chinese attacked these in very large strength, and these people then made a very orderly withdrawal from these areas. They came to DBO, and then they made a withdrawal from DBO. That is the withdrawing team that got caught for 18 days and was finally found by IAF helicopters who dropped supplies. That escape and the trauma and the casualties they suffered on the way and the frostbites and things, those have been documented in details. These posts were 5 to 10 kilometers east of Dolbe Goldi airstrip. East means towards China. That means they were on that much of the Depsang Plains. But when you come south, when you come to the southern half of Depsang Plains are not small. Depsang Plains generally west to the east, west is towards India, east is towards China, west to the east are about 60 to 70 kilometers long, and north to the south, north is Karakoram Pass, north to the south are about 40 to 50 kilometers. So it's a fairly large area. So on the southern side, India had posts almost 30 to 40 kilometers east of what is bottleneck now. In fact, that situation changed in 1962 because many of these units moved and India did not go and reoccupy these places. However, to many of these places, India had been running patrols in the course of time. That process started as India built up more supplies in subsector north. In 1993, however, 1993, when the first border agreement was signed, that is for to maintain peace and tranquility. At that point, in the northern half, India had no presence. India had no presence at all in Depsang. In the southern half, India still had some presence 18 to 20 kilometers east of bottleneck. That, however, was not maintained. That was basically asserted by way of regular patrols. Those are things that the Chinese stopped now. Once again, the Chinese effort was depth denial to India, depth in defense. At the same time, India's effort was that even if you don't occupy this, don't let the Chinese come and pitch tent there. That is the main contention in this entire area. So I thought before we go into what's happened right now, it's important for us to understand what the issue is. The issue is not about a big return of Aksai from China to India or a grab of Arunachal by China or any acceptance of each other's claims. Those are big issues that will happen in the course of time. The issue right now from the Chinese point of view, because they started this, their objective was to re-establish their 1959 claim line. India's idea was to deny them that. That said, I will now invite Snehesh Alex Philip to join in. Snehesh, there is still a fair bit of clutter. In fact, I see every day new clutter comes in. What exactly has happened in Ladakh?
So as of now, as we speak today was the disengagement was supposed to be completed. It was hoped that the disengagement would be completed. But just before this video started, I checked with people in the know. I'm told that it's still some last bit of it is still left. So this would be most probably would be completed tomorrow or something. What the army is saying, well, not officially per se, but what the army is saying is that there was an agreement that was reached on the 21st of October for an agreement that was reached and signed by the Corps Commander from the Indian side and the counterpart on the Chinese side, the PLA side, under which uh, in Depsang and Demchok, there would be a disengagement that would be carried out, and patrolling would be restored to April 2020 status. This is what they're saying. They're also saying that the patrolling would involve a coordinated patrol, which means that both sides will inform the other when they carry out any kind of patrol. The army says that they would be able to patrol the particular points that are there, which is the PP10 to PP13.
That is 10, 11, 11A, 12, 12A, 13. I mean, starting like this, 10 up north.
Yeah, 10 up north, and then it goes, keeps down,
and after 13 comes Galwan.
Yeah, 14 is PP14 is Galwan.
Yes.
So the army says that that's where it'll happen. And in Demchok also, it says that it goes back to the pre-2020 status. Now, interesting is that in Depsang, the last time the Indian patrol went and touched these patrolling points was in January 2020. Now, in this particular Depsang area, on the Indian side, when they start patrolling, they go on vehicles, they reach this area called Bottleneck. Now, the reason why it is called Bottleneck is because this area is too small, too narrow for any vehicles to cross through. So the Indians from Bottleneck, Indians get down from the vehicles and start patrolling by foot. Away from Bottleneck, about a kilometer and a half is an area called Y Junction. The reason why it's called Y Junction is because it has two roads, one which goes to PP10 and one which goes to PP13, and you can access the other areas in between. So since the Doklam standoff of 2017, the Chinese have built a road on that, on the Nala there on that side, and they've put these cameras there. So every time the Indian troops used to go by foot, the Chinese used to come in the vehicles and block the Indian patrol. So since 2017, mid-2017, since the Doklam standoff, the Chinese have been doing that. India has managed to reach some of these points in between. In January, what we've learned so far, as far as the SITREP is concerned, that was the last time they went through. And what we've learned is that India was able to push through its way to these patrolling points. So now, as per this understanding, these patrolling points will see. The army says that this agreement is purely for Depsang and Demchok. They also insist that there is no quid pro quo. At the same time, they also say that there are separate talks that are happening in the central sector. And in
central sector is Uttar Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh,
Uttarakhand,
Himachal Pradesh.
Yeah. So that's the central sector and the eastern sector. So from a layman's point of view, we call it the northern sector. The MEA or the army would call it the western sector of the LAC. So that's what the army says. The talks are ongoing in both these locations also, and there is a larger understanding that they have reached. Remember that the army, there was a larger framework that was agreed upon by India and China that was done at the diplomatic level, which I suspect would have been done following the talks that Jaishankar held, as well as the National Security Advisor when he met his Chinese counterpart. There was a larger framework met, and the army says that under the larger framework, these meetings took place, and on the 21st of October, the specific agreement was signed for Depsang and Demchok.
In the central sector, that is Uttarakhand and Himachal, are there areas where patrols can have scraps?
Well, there are in Uttarakhand side, the patrols have had the Chinese have tried to come in. The Indian troops have stopped them.
That's Barahoti.
That's the Barahoti side, where we have a independent brigade which is stationed there. So those areas have seen tensions, and so have the tensions been noticed in the northeast also, especially in the Subansiri Valley and in the Tawang sector.
That is way to the east of the sectors we are more familiar with.
Yeah.
That is Tawang, Bomdila, Sela.
Yeah.
Way to the east.
Yeah. So those sectors have seen, even during the standoff itself, for example, Yangtze, saw clash between India and Chinese troops in 2021 as well as in 2022. So those, even when the standoff was happening, the clashes happened. The difference being that the Indians were taken by surprise in Eastern Ladakh, in 2020. The moment that happened, the Indian army went on an alert, and then they activated the entire LAC,
So they
which
moved
is
ahead.
they moved ahead. So in the central sector as well as in the eastern sector, when I say moved ahead, it doesn't mean that they crossed
Yes,
over.
they moved ahead to what they saw as the line of actual
Yeah, they
control, so
saw
the
as the line
Chinese
of
don't
actual.
come into any open spaces there.
Exactly. So they didn't want Chinese to repeat what they did in Eastern Ladakh, right? So they moved ahead. So they blocked. So in a way, they blocked the Chinese patrol, which used to happen periodically, and where face-offs used to happen.
So Yangtze, now what will happen in Yangtze? You said something in your story.
So Yangtze, the understanding that have been reached, the army still keeps quiet, saying that there is no quid pro quo. I am not calling it a quid pro quo, but there's an understanding that has been reached in which there would be what is known as escorted patrol. Now, this is again a term that I heard for the first time, and I checked what would an escorted patrol mean. And what I was told is that the Indian troops would be there. The Indian troops are not withdrawing, but they would allow the Chinese to come to a particular point that they wanted to come, that they used to come. But the Indians would be there, so which means that they would be under Indian observance, and they would not be allowed to go beyond that particular point. So this is what they mean by escorted patrol. In Depsang, what we'll have is coordinated patrol, where we'll inform, come, and go. Here, it would be a escorted patrol, is what has been spoken about and agreed upon.
So what do you see happening by Diwali? Do you see the usual exchange of sweets, or?
Well, by Diwali, at least the usual exchange of sweets will happen in Eastern Ladakh for sure. It hasn't happened for some time, but I'm told that there would be exchange of sweets that would take place. Interestingly, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh would be traveling to Tawang for Diwali. So we are yet to hear exactly where Prime Minister Narendra Modi would be going for Diwali. But usually, they would visit one of the locations where either the army, the BSF, ITBP is placed. So I'm assuming that since Rajnath Singh would be going to Tawang, maybe Prime Minister would go to a different location, may not necessarily be at the LAC.
So overall, you would say that this is so far a satisfactory arrangement with no bugs to it, no hidden surprises.
Well, see, the entire details of the disengagement is still not known, right? For example, if you speak to people in the army if you speak to, for example, if you speak to people here in the know, even at the army headquarters, not everyone is really sure about what has happened. You have details of it pertaining to the sector that they are involved with, but they're not sure about what is happening in the other sector. So, of course, there are people who know the larger framework that is in works, but they are keeping very quiet. But information is just trickling in about exactly what all arrangement has been done. But the fact is that there has been a larger framework that has been signed at the diplomatic level, and now the military, that is the armies from both sides are now working out the technicalities or the logistics or the tactical on ground tactical measures that need to be taken to implement the overall framework that has
And
been
right
agreed
now,
upon.
the political direction seems to be to calm things down.
The political direction is to calm things down, and things on the ground are being worked out. But this doesn't mean, remember that this right now it's only about disengagement. This doesn't mean that Indian troops pack off and come back to the barracks, maybe come back to where they were posted earlier. The troops will remain in Ladakh.
That is the additional troop.
That is the additional troops will, some of that additional troops will remain in Ladakh. The equipment from both sides are not going anywhere. The Chinese will have their equipment on their side. The Indians will have their equipment on their side. But yes, the face-off is not there. The whole idea is for the trust to be built. There's a huge trust deficit. So, this escorted patrolling that has been spoken about, or let's say the coordinated patrolling, would take place. And remember that during winters, while we'll have a first patrol in Depsang very soon, by end of this month or maybe immediately after Diwali, there are no patrols that take place during winters. So whatever patrolling, formal patrolling will eventually start in a proper way would only start post winters.
So far so good on this one. Although knowing the Chinese, you don't know how long this will last until the mood changes again. Because Chinese also use these flutters on the line of actual control to achieve political objectives or to convey political messages. So India has to stay prepared and maybe invest a bit more on its defense preparedness. That said, I will comment two books to you connected to the same subject. General J.J. Singh, our former Chief of Army Staff, he wrote a very good book, The McMahon Line, and the book that I consult all the time. I think I bought it at in Connaught Place in Delhi, somewhere by Janpath, where in the past you used to get books on the footpath and old books. Sometimes you find really wonderful old books. So this is Himalayan Frontiers by Dorothy Goodman, a political review of British, Chinese, Indian, and Russian rivalry. So this has the most detailed old maps of the kind on which these agreements were based. And if you see these maps, you can see that just the thickness of a pen would make the difference of a few tens of kilometers on either side. And that is where we have come from. This all of this comes from the pre-satellite, pre-precision camera era. That's one. These are the two books I want to comment to you. I don't think you will find this any place except in a very special library, very well equipped library. I don't know if it's available in a soft copy. You can check it out. But Snehesh, before I let you go, going away from this area, something's happened also in Aknoor sector.
Yeah.
These three terrorists who fired at an ambulance have got killed. And it's the first time in Kashmir that in internal security operation, counter insurgency, we've seen armored vehicles being used.
No, this is under the 16 core, and this is not the first time they've used this BMPs in the same area in way back in 2016, 2017 also.
BMPs are the Russian made, or maybe Soviet in this case. I don't know how old these are.
Yeah.
Infantry combat vehicles.
Yeah, which are now licensed made by
Right.
the heavy vehicles factory in Avdi. So this was an important operation because actually the soldiers were lucky. If you've seen videos that have come out on social media, the bullets actually went through the ambulance and all. It actually went through soldiers' backpack and all. But post that, there was an operation that was launched immediately by the local units. There were special forces that was also part of the operation, the 9 SF. They were part of the operation. Eventually, the three terrorists were...
For non-nerds, SF is Special Forces.
Yeah, Special Forces, the 9 Para SF, which was there, which was part of the operation. The troops overall, the security force were able to pin down these three terrorists. One body was recovered yesterday itself. In this operation, though there was no loss of human lives on the Indian side, but yes, one of the canine soldier, Phantom, he's a Belgian Malinois, born he's 5 years old, 4 years old, because he was born in 2020. He got killed.
Because he had gone ahead.
He's an assault dog of the Indian Army. He got killed. And the two soldiers, two other remaining terrorists were also killed, but their bodies were recovered today. So they have been, while, I had tweeted last evening itself that 3 terrorists were killed, the official stand was still 1. Today, the official toll stands at 3 terrorists.
So it looks like in this region, balance is now being restored a little bit, because for a long time there was an adverse balance.
Absolutely.
Because terrorists were able to get surprise. In this case, they were hit back in strength, and hopefully this will continue.
Hopefully.